Just checking my audio. Can you hear me?
Can hear you, but you're pretty choppy. People are still joining. We'll give it a moment or two more for the join rate to slow before we start.
Why can't my office have a floor to ceiling window like Liz's?
Yeah. Yeah, that sky is pretty.
Weren't we supposed to all have like some kind of sun skylight, fiber optic skylights that connect our basements to our roofs or something? Wasn't that supposed to be a thing in the 80s?
Does it have to be a roof in California, though? I mean, isn't that where Liz
Well,
is?
I mean, if you have more advanced portal technology than me, then, you know, sure. Can I have a
Because a roof,
backyard on Ganymede, I guess is the question.
yeah, because a roof in Northern Virginia or a full light or full window in Northern Virginia is not going to be as nice as the one that Liz has behind her.
I guess it's fine as long as you're willing to share your water with California.
Yeah.
Well, if we're still in the laughing time, then I think it's just Northern California that needs to get Southern California to shape up because
Oh,
Northern
yeah.
California is fine. In fact, Sacramento has too much.
Maybe Southern California shouldn't have built itself in a desert.
Listen,
The desert's coming for you.
as someone who was born in LA, I'm happy to have everybody who wasn't just leave and go back to wherever they came from. It's all the East Coast people who come to Southern California. But yeah, no, I agree. I have to
So I think we're
rewatch
far
China.
enough into this that we can. It's 5. Not really trying to shut it down. We just need to go ahead and jump in. So, doesn't look like Jay has completely joined yet. Maybe he has. So the notes have been up for a few days. The outline of the notes set the agenda. Does anybody have any agenda bashes before we start? As we get into the meeting, if you're capable of sharing video, please do so. Having an around the table experience is our goal. Do remember though that this is being recorded and will be made available on YouTube at the end of the meeting. All right, let's jump in. First thing that I want to brainstorm with the group about is whether or not there is anything we need to be doing tool-wise in preparation for IETF 116 that we are not already doing. For convenience, I copied the upcoming pertinent important dates into the notes. I will call out, as we talk below, we've had a round of focus on meeting affecting bugs. So there's been a big push on clearing bugs that in particular affect scheduling and then affect the use of the agenda during the meeting. So we think that we've cleared the really rough parts of that out of the way, but I would like to get everyone here to think about whether or not there is something that really got in the road at the last meeting that they haven't seen evidence that we've cleared away for the coming one.
So this will be our first draft deadline with the async submission tool, API.
Yep.
So I'm curious to know what percentage will come in with the new versus the old. And can we make that, can we make that, reduce that to 0 for the old for 117 once we know what the trend is? I don't know if we have any trend right now, data right now.
Yeah, realistically, the users of the APIs, you're a pretty rare case using it with scripts that you wrote yourself. The rest of it is just heavily dominated by the MT derived.
Right. But they have to update. They have to know to update their code, and a lot of people don't know to do that. So anyway, I think this was great because that is a pain point where people do run into errors. This may be a new experience for some people that they have the asynchronous stuff, because some people only submit the draft, the hour before the deadline. That's the only time they do it. But at least I feel like it's going to be much better experience for overall. No one's going to get a timeout and be confused.
Yep. I'm not seeing people rush to the microphone for, hey, what about this issue that we had? So do rack your brains if you can think of anything that we need to address before we get to the meeting. It would be better to know about it early. All right, I'm gonna move on. We still are planning to move DNS into Cloudflare. We've run into several things that are taking longer than we had originally anticipated they would. One of the ones that we're working through right now are the consequences of who our current registrars are. We won't go into details on that on this call. Michael asked a question in the notes in response to the reminder that there will be a short period where the zone is not signed. Yes, we do mean that the DS records will be withdrawn. Some time will be allowed to pass to let caches all catch up. Then a new DS record would be inserted later and the chain would be built on that. Doing a proper in-place signed rollover is really utterly impractical. The combination of what the registrars provide, what the cloud service providers provide, we would run into trouble trying to do that at Cloudflare because of some policies that they have that would not let our old key in nicely, and upgrading, roll our keys in place before we went to the move has different problems. And really, we've mined this pretty hard, and the path that makes the most sense to go through is the one that Cloudflare is recommending, which is to just go through a short period where we're not signed. So
It would be interesting to have someone debrief you guys as to what your hassle was, because it sounds like this would be actually a good BCP.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe over beer.
Yes. So it's still our intent to get this done in the next few weeks. If we get to where we're right up against the draft deadline, of course, we'll hold and wait and not disrupt the infrastructure when we're under one of the crunch loads. But we'll see where we are. I'm going to move forward now. So the next thing that I wanted to have discussion around was our progress on Postgres migrations and just the improvement of our Postgres environments in general. So I'm going to cover both of these next two topics at once. As we noted at the last meeting, we needed to reschedule the transition because we discovered that we had some non-trivial issues with the differences in collation on Postgres than we had under MySQL. We've done a lot of digging. We are fairly confident that we understand where all the places that we need to change are. We've changed most of them. We've got just a few left. I'm wrestling right now with the Django username so that we don't end up with the potential for collisions in the username just because of case folding. Life's going to be a little bit better for us under Postgres in that the collation that we have been using under MySQL to date did some rather questionable things where it would fold accented characters back into unaccented characters for equivalence purposes. The next few days are going to include an attempt to migrate the actual production database. Our efforts so far have been focusing on the test database. We're going to trial a migration of the full production database on a machine that is the equivalent of the full production machine. We'll basically be hijacking our hot standby and trying that work there. That will inform us, give us a better sense of what the actual downtime we're going to need for the true production cutover. So we should be able to report on that before and at the next tools call. So while we were down in this discovery period focusing on collation, we noticed that the Postgres install on our main production machine is very old, was probably originally installed before UTF-8 was the ubiquitous answer for what your default character set and collation rules should be based around. To address that, we're planning over the next, again, couple of weeks to rebuild the Postgres cluster on IETF-A using the more modern sets of defaults. There's only one production database in Postgres on the production machine right now. That's the database that backs the wagtail portion of the website. That database is fairly small, and updates to it are at a pace that's very much under our control. So this rebuild of the cluster we don't anticipate that it will truly inconvenience anyone, and we'll be in a better place once that's made. Anybody have any questions, any input, anything that you think we should change in the direction that we're taking? All right, moving on. Kusara's been pushing pretty hard on bringing IDDIF into parity with RSCDIF to get the last pieces where IDDIF was not doing the same things that RSCDIF was, and discovered that the amount of effort to bridge that last bit of gap was probably not worth the investment compared to switching directions and moving back to continuing to support RSCDIF itself. What we had been trying to do was to move to inside a single programming language framework in Python, was where IDDIF is, so that we had self-contained tests that we had built around it, as opposed to what we have with RSCDIF, which is a shell script that's calling out to several other languages like awk. But again, the lift to get that last little bit tells us that we should just continue to focus on the RSCDIF instead, and go ahead and build up our test framework, just expecting that we'll be shelling out to shell for the execution. And it just puts the work in a different place.
So does that mean that RFC diff will become the default again?
That is our plan.
Don't experience changes that bother me. I know there are a few who are quite vocal about the changes, and I a little bit wonder whether a button on the IDDIF output that said "Give me RFC diff" and I don't have to enter all the details again would satisfy what I suspect are a small minority of people that notice the difference. And I understand that RFC diff has a significantly higher CPU load, and is much less flexible in terms of inputs. So I'm surprised about this direction, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So the biggest problem that we had with RSCDIF, if we back up and look at it from the highest level, is that our web service implementation of it used a proprietary attempt to build a Python-based rapid deployment thing that Henrik had written, this PYHT. The security issues that we had are all wrapped up in that PYHT code. The deployment of RSCDIF that we have at Author Tools right now does not suffer from those issues. So however we proceed, we're going to deprecate the PYHT wrapper as currently exposed under our GitHub organization. Put appropriate red tape around it, the warning tape, and then eventually just archive that particular repository. It then gets into a question if we're going to be supporting RSCDIF anyhow, why continue to put the effort into keeping both code bases up to date and in parity? So,
RFC diff on Author Tools, RFC diff will be a drop-in replacement, so you will not lose any features that you currently enjoy with IDDIF, like providing a different format or anything like that. Those will be in place.
So let's kick around Kusara, Michael's suggestion for, at least while we have both of them in place, a really easy way to bop back and forth from the UI. And then Michael, think a little bit more about the issues that we're bringing up here about long-term maintenance, and see if you think that we're doing the right thing that we would be doing the right thing by moving to just focusing on RFC-DIF going forward.
If you say that it's like this is the, you know, short term next year, yeah, we're just going to defer some of this, then I think that's great. I think the part of the issue going forward is that the number of people that have the awk plus shell plus this plus that knowledge, deep knowledge, is very rare. It's already exceedingly rare. Um, and you know, awk was terrible 25 years ago, right? We
Yeah.
have Perl for that reason. And you know, we've literally had an entire generation born that since who probably, you know, so that's just, you know, even just getting contributions from people, you know, it's a real, I would think it's a real pain to do things. If someone wants to set it up themselves and have it locally, wow, that's probably a big disaster for most people. But anyway, I'm not, I've read the complaints on the tools list. And I was like, yeah, is that really that important to you? You can't cope. But you know, change is hard for some people. So
Okay. That's been very good input. Thank you. I think we'll take and look at it again for the long what our path is for the long haul. If no one has any further questions about IDDIF, RFC-DIF, our next topic is about our potential use of Mastodon. There was a flurry of excitement, suggestion that we set something up to give it a try. Nick has already given us a proof of concept that we can run an instance of Mastodon that is fairly well controlled for who would have access to it, who could post. We're wondering if the right thing to do to move forward is to try running with this site such that the only thing that can post to it is either automated spots in the data tracker, similar to the places that people had been feeding off of and sending messages off into Twitter. Possibly having a queue similar to IETF announced that Greg or a team could moderate so that things that were outside the bounds of what might come out of an automated processing chain inside the data tracker could be sent to this instance, but have them all be of an announced nature. So thoughts? Anybody think that this is a good thing to do? Is this a waste of our time? What would people like to see happen? Rich, go ahead and jump in. Yep, your mute button, one of the many mute buttons is in your way.
Okay, there we go. Too many different UIs and conferencing systems. So I'd be in favor of doing some announce only thing where it was actually tied, coupled to the data tracker, and somebody, a working group could just say, yeah, I want these kinds of announcements to go out. I don't think we should be hosting a service that lets people get a Mastodon account and do their own, the way we had tried with Jabber, perhaps. But yeah, it's fun. It's the new shiny thing, but there are a number of groups who are using Mark Nottingham's or other tools to post announcements, including HTTP API, because we have a lot of non-IETF contributors. So yeah, I would definitely put this on the list as something, automated announcements as something we should do, and include in that things like, oh, there's a new IETF blog post, there's a new, announcements of upcoming meetings and things like that. not just working group stuff.
Any other thoughts?
If the effort is low, it feels like a worthwhile experiment, but I think it would be good to pose it as an so that if it turns out that people don't actually use it, that we don't get stuck maintaining another server and service that no one ends up using actually. So that would be my suggestion.
I hope we didn't. That Jay just turned his video. Nope, looks like he fell off the call. We may end up coming back to this because it looked like he was getting ready to jump into the queue. So
these activities like draft changes and other events, is that going to be done by some ad hoc service that's going to pull the data tracker, or does this mean we're adding some kind of outgoing events from the data tracker?
the second. So
That's
we've already
useful activity, right? Even if the Mastodon turns out to be a disaster and no one wants to go there, then we would still have that outgoing, those outgoing hooks. And I think that's an interesting, useful thing to be able to do something with.
anticipating it, we would base this kind of in the same places that we have the mail trigger hooks. So Jay, you dropped briefly. Did you have, you looked like you were about to say something right when you dropped. Okay. Anybody has any other thoughts, please go ahead and send them to the list, but we'll take a look at not burning a ridiculous amount of effort, but seeing what we can do with a small amount of effort to get an experiment rolling. So, next topic I had, I don't think is going to take a lot, but maybe I'll be surprised. We've got a bunch of names of lists that we direct people to send bug reports to that are just no longer self-descriptive. Django project, data tracker project's a little bit better. Django project though doesn't really mean anything to people that aren't like deeply on the inside. I would like to do a cleanup around where we scrape all of these things away with redirects until enough time has gone by that it doesn't matter. But what we start advertising is just simply tools help at. So we could bite shed the name. The tools team spent a little bit of time kicking around names, and tools help is what we landed on as the thing that is most likely to cause people to know when to use that versus just normal support at IETF.org. So, thoughts on this idea? Yep, nobody's screaming about it. We'll just go ahead and go down this path. Ryan, you want to talk about the IMR reports?
Sure. So this item is just to kind of communicate that we're doing some work on moving some legacy reports. So there's some legacy progress reports, which are monthly reports that live at the address in the document here, that contain information about draft actions, group actions, and some mailing list information, number of posts and subscribers. And these reports were produced with some rather old Perl and Python scripts that would periodically fail when the underlying systems were updated. So there's work being done to move the reports into the appropriate systems, data tracker, and mail archive, where they can be easier maintained. So that'll be done, and then this page will be updated to link to the new locations for the monthly data.
Anyone know of any uses of the IMR reports that what we're doing here would disrupt? Any use cases that we haven't covered? Anybody remember what IMR originally stood for? Yeah. Okay. Into the FYI section. Some of these we should probably have promoted up into the hot topics, but so we'll go through them a little more slowly than we might otherwise have. The infrastructure strategy topic, the RFI has been released. It closes at, near the end of the month. Hopefully everybody's aware of it. If anybody knows of somebody that they think should be sending us an opinion on what we should be doing, make sure that they're aware of it so that we have the best input we have that we can get available to us at the end of the RFI and we start moving into the RFP phase. For our wiki migrations from Track into Wiki.js, Greg has reported that we are nearing the end of the content migration effort. Jay calls out that the trust has raised a question about how we're licensing things and tracking attributions and problems of that nature. If people haven't had a chance to read the last minute update to the notes, give those a skim right quick. And if anybody has any questions or wants to have a conversation about what's happening now, go ahead and jump in. All right. I'll go ahead and move forward. For the data tracker, the report form is the same as what we've had before. Quite a bit of activity since our January meeting with the 5 releases, focusing on the 3 points that are listed in the message there. A few extra other bug fixes in addition to those, but those really framed up the larger parts of the efforts that went in. We're going to finish out the meeting impacting issues and then spend our time between now and the next meeting focusing hard on finishing the Postgres work, setting it down, then queuing up the move to Django 4, which we expect to happen right after Postgres. This is becoming much more important as we are starting to lose dependencies and have to pin to unsupported versions of those dependencies as they are dropping support for Django 2. From our upcoming work, Michael already brought up that we've got the API draft submission going through the asynchronous tooling that we built. We're hoping to add basically update the GUI submission endpoint to use that async backend as well and handhold the people through the submission experience change so that there's as little confusion as possible. This is something that we're hoping to have deployed before we get to the heavy crunch of submission for 116. The rest of that I'll let people read. All of those dots are fairly big blocks of work. If anybody has any questions about data tracker, now would be a good time to jump in. Kasara, I'll let you call out anything from the next 5 blocks that you want to bring up in real time.
No, I don't have anything to bring up. Are there any questions?
So I added a note. Issue 339 for bib XML services is blocking for the RPC for the publication of RFCs. It looks like a trivial issue, and for the bridge here, the target URL for references points to RFC versus info. And so it doesn't point to the info page. And for us to redo all the references to get something published would take a whole lot of time. So it would be wonderful if that could be fixed quickly.
So if you follow there's already a PR against that issue. I think its scope may be a little bit too large. I've got a question back out to Ribos about whether or not we can scope the change initially to the bib.xml RFC data set, where we know what target should be. We're fairly comfortable with what target. We have an answer for the short term for what target should point to. For some of the other data sets, it's not quite so obvious yet. And I suspect that the global change would probably bring in target values that pointed to the wrong thing. I know that when we asked them to take the target attribute away earlier, they were, for instance, pointing to the archive text for internet drafts instead of data tracker. So, so yeah, we're going to continue to push getting this resolved as quickly as we can. So this is, I guess, just to make sure, this is the train has stopped and no RFCs will be published until we straighten this out. Level bug.
That's correct.
Okay. Anybody have anything else they want to bring up about the bib.xml service, author tools, XML RFC, the Wagtail website? Ryan's here if anybody has anything they want to ask about the mail archive service. Otherwise, you can take the report he has in there as read, which would bring us to any other business. Anybody have anything else that they would like to discuss today? Once again, thanks everyone for their time. The conversations on these calls are very important for the tools team as we're moving forward, and I really appreciate the level of engagement that we get from our community members in making this all go in the right direction. So we'll see you online, and our next tools call is right before 1:16. So we'll see you then. Thank you and bye-bye.